Yes, people, yes, people, yes, people. Welcome back to the We Talk Football podcast. It's episode 12 and an episode me and Quaker are really excited for. Now, it's a special episode for us because we've managed to get on board today as our guest, a current athletic journalist and broadcaster. It's Adam Leventhal, a man that's very well respected in the field of sports journalism, a man that Quaker looks up to massively, and a guy that I've watched on Sky Sports for years. So we are ecstatic. How are you feeling, Quakes?
Yeah, I'm all good, man. It's like you say, it's a big coup for the We Talk Football podcast. Got somebody who's very, very well respected, covers Watford specifically for the Athletic as well as contributing to other pieces. And as a massive subscriber to the Athletic, I'm very excited to hear what Adam has to say and his insight into sports journalism as a whole. So yeah, look forward to this one, man.
As I said, I'm really excited. So let's not let's not beat around the bush and let's just jump into it.
Let's go. So thank you for joining us, Adam. Obviously it's a Monday morning. We've got you out of bed early. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you guys?
Not too bad, not too bad. It was a decent weekend. Chelsea kind of let me down a little bit in the big clash on Sunday, but apart from that, it's been a good weekend.
What did you make of that? It was quite a it was a game of chess, wasn't it?
It was. It went as expected, I suppose. As an optimist, I thought we would go out there and kind of attack them a little bit more than we did, but you have to be kind of pragmatic in those kind of games, especially when it gets to the second half. And I felt like both teams at the end of it would settle for a draw, but I wish we saw a little bit more from both sides.
Yeah.
What did you make of it?
Typical.
I enjoyed watching it, but it did just sort of become quite apparent that, especially Tottenham, I mean, Harry Kane was almost playing as a central midfielder for half the game. It just sort of seemed to me that Jose Mourinho just didn't want to lose rather than win the game. And although they had probably, the ability to go and play a ball in behind, Son was just a little bit more reserved. There was that spell in the second half where you thought, maybe they're going to try and go for it. But on the whole, I just thought Jose was back to park the bus a little bit and didn't want to lose. So he's got, if he's genuinely in the mix for the title this year, so I can't really blame him for being a bit cagey against a rival team. So no, it was good. I enjoyed the watch, but then I'd sort of earmarked that to watch that game, and I thought, I should have watched Southampton Man United earlier on, but can't win them all.
Yeah, that was a crazy one, the Southampton United one, especially the second half comeback from United, and Bruno Fernandes again putting on the clinic, more than just a penalty merchant.
Yeah, he's exactly that, and he's also I had a vested interest in that game because I dropped him into my fantasy team as well. So I was like, bingo, and he got a goal and an assist.
Yeah, goal and assist.
And obviously Cavani. Yeah. And now you starting to think, is Cavani going to start enough to actually warrant a place in the team? I'm not sure. I don't know. In my fantasy team, I'm talking rather than my priorities. Yeah, so me and my son do it together, and we're quite into it. So yeah, that's all good. But we've gone off already. Sorry, you carry on.
No problem. So obviously we've got you on. We reached out to you to jump on because throughout the month of November we've been talking to a lot of ex-pros and ex-academy players about their experiences within football and within academies and how the game's treated them. What you do is the next best thing for fans in terms of actually get to talk about football and making a living off of football. So me and Jane thought it'd be interesting to get your insight in terms of football journalism, how you got your start. So I suppose the most natural place to start would be, how did you actually start on the football ladder and get into sports journalism initially?
Well, you're right. It's probably the next best thing to being a footballer, but you do feel a million miles away sometimes because you think, I'm no athlete and I could never have made it when you're actually up close and personal with those footballers. But I started when I was 15 at Capital Gold. So like whenever anyone's at school, in secondary school, it's around the 4th, 5th year that you get to do your first work experience. And I actually asked my mum, who knew someone that worked at Capital Radio, do you reckon, you could get me in there? And luckily they said sort of a reluctant yes. Yeah, go on then, come in for a couple of days. Because little did I know that at Capital, it was very much, if you're in, you're working hard, you're either on air or you're cutting tape. That's how, you know what I mean? Not digital editing. This was going in there with a reel-to-reel machine, cutting tape with a China graph and a razor blade and all this sort of stuff. So I did a couple of days there, and then I also did a couple of days at Radio 5 that same week. And then I asked the guys at Capital Gold Sports, so this is sort of Jonathan Pearce, Steve Wilson, Rob Watton, Dave Clark, all the guys that went on to, BBC, that's where Jonathan Pearce is. All the other guys were at Sky, or Steve is on Match of the Day as well. So, they went on to bigger and better things. Jim Proudfoot as well. He was there when I was starting. And I just kept on going back every weekend and sort of making tea, working on the big Saturday show, ferrying scores in and out of the studio and stuff. And it's funny when I talk about it now, you think we've moved on so much since I started. Obviously the tape, the actual tape. And then also when a goal went in, we used to be sitting outside by a computer desktop, and the goals would actually come in on the news wires, and then you'd have to write it down, who scored, you take it in to the studio, the producer would then tell Jonathan down the line, right, goal at Wickham or whatever, and then he'd have to take it in and then do it. And now you look, when you're at a game now and you're working on radio, you've obviously got everything there. You could do what we were doing just by looking at your phone now. So it just shows how much has everything's evolved since 1995 was when I started. So I gradually worked my way up at Capital. I started doing on-air stuff when I was 16, 17. And my first, this is another sort of window into what we used to do rather than how it is now. We used to sometimes, if we didn't send a reporter to a game, and we had loads of reporters all over the country, but like say if it was a lower league game, when like Brentford were in the 3rd division or whatever, or Barnet or something, we would cover the game by being in the studio, but calling up and listening to the commentary on Club Call, and then doing a report ourselves. So that was the first time that I actually did anything on air. I was like, I can't remember exactly what game it was. I think it was a Brentford game. So you go into the studio next door and then sort of pretend that you're at the game effectively. So it was, that was my start. And then I started going out to games, and then I was doing production. So I'd be in the studio cutting matches as they were going on. So I don't know if you remember, you guys are probably, I don't know, you might do. I'm trying to pick your ages exactly. You probably, I'm going to say you don't remember, so I'll be kind. At half time, they'd play a wrap of the best chances and the goals and all that sort of stuff. So in the first half, you'd be listening to the commentary. If there was a chance, you'd go to the reel-to-reel machine, take it off, go to your own little station, and then do a little highlights reel, and then that would be played out straight away at half time. So you'd have to be on it, sort of taping it all together. So that's my background originally was doing that, and then I worked more and more and more on doing on-air stuff, and then I got to go to games, and then I went to university up in Nottingham, and I was working whilst I was at university as well. So I've sort of been in it for, what are we now, 2020? So quick maths, 25 years. Yeah, 25 years I've been doing it. So I've been doing it since I was a kid, really. So yeah.
So when you went to Capital, you went to university. Did you then go back to Capital after you finished university, or were you working at Capital throughout your time at uni? So
I had a year off after school, and I was working in my local threshers, and which I loved. I loved that job, by the way. That was one of my favourite jobs, working in an off license. And I was working at Capital during that whole year, so more of like a proper job, working there 3 or 4 times a week, doing news bulletins and things like that, and then working on tournaments and whatever was going on that summer. So I worked there, and then I went to university the following year, and that was, university was great, but I do look back and I think I had to sort of sacrifice quite a lot. I still had a good time, but quite a lot, because every Friday night, my evening would be spent in the library sound really stupid. In the library, sort of printing out my stats for the game that I was doing the next day. So because I was in Nottingham, they would send me, and it was brilliant. It was a brilliant opportunity, and they gave me an ISDN kit to take with me to university, and they said, look, we'll send you to all the games north and in and around of Nottingham. So I was being sent all over the shop, Halifax,
all over the Midlands,
Preston, everywhere. And then, so I'd be printing out my stats on paper, because obviously you didn't really take laptops with you, or it wasn't quite as good as it is now, obviously. And then I'd be leaving early on a Saturday morning to drive to Sheffield or wherever I was going. And I look back now and I think although pretty much every night is sort of a party at university, Wednesday night you go out and it'd be Nights at Ocean, which was a sort of a grimy, sticky floored club in Nottingham where people would go. You go out midweek as well, but the weekends I never really sort of got stuck in on a Friday night because I was always going to a game. So that was what I did. But it was such an education to do that and to go to grounds and sort of cut my teeth in the north, places I'd never been to, and also I was doing it without. I know this sounds sort of like a minor detail, but you're driving to Halifax, or you're driving to Wigan or Preston or wherever, Macclesfield, wherever you're going, without sat nav, with a map on your on your passenger seat and stuff, trying to find your way, and football grounds are tucked in. So basically, all you would do eventually is go, right, forget the roads. I'm following the floodlights, and would just sort of get to find the grounds that way. But I always remember having to go to Birmingham, and Birmingham's just so confusing. I always just used to get so confused going to Birmingham without sat nav. Nowadays, you just put it in. You don't even think, do you? So, that was all part of my my footballing education up until the point I left university. And then just quickly after I left university, I went back to Capital, and they had this contract with Arsenal at the time to provide their club call service, so where people used to phone up and listen to the headlines and all that sort of stuff, but also their online commentary, which had only just started. All the clubs obviously do it now. They have their online commentary, they have their TV stations and everything, but this is when it first started. And I was the commentator for Arsenal for the 2012-13 season via Capital. So it meant that I did all their games home and away, did all the European trips, would speak to Arsene Wenger every Thursday. We'd do an interview, and then I'd be first, after the game and all that sort of stuff. So it was a brilliant education, and having a season watching Arsenal at Highbury as well. So and it was a great team. So you had all the big guns there. It wasn't a great season. They only won the FA Cup that season, but Henry, Ljungberg, Pires, Vieira. Who else? Well, the whole back four: Seaman, Campbell, Keown, everyone. You name it, they were still there, and it was a brilliant experience to cover a top team home and away and in Europe. It was fantastic.
Probably the best time for. Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I'm going to say yes. So like yourself, I went to university in Nottingham as well, so I'm well acquainted with Ocean, especially on a Friday night. So my heart goes out.
Were you at the proper university, or were you at Nottingham Trent?
I was at the Uni of Nottingham.
Ah, right. Well, you see, you're already one up, because I was at Trent. I was doing the broadcast journalism degree. We were doing more vocational stuff. I bet you were a bit more big brainy, were you?
Well, I did a nutrition degree, so biosciences. So so it's serving me well now when I talk about football on the podcast. But as I said, the East Midlands. It's interesting that you went to university there, because, like you alluded to, there's so many football clubs in such a close proximity. You got, especially nowadays, that are top class. You got Leicester, obviously both the Nottingham clubs. Notts County aren't doing so well, but then Derby, Sheffield, and so it must have been a good position for you to be, regardless of the travelling. But anyway, that's enough about Ocean. I suppose that this is a good place to transition into when you had your time at Sky. So you've already said that you were leading the line essentially for Arsenal. What was the next step after Arsenal? Is that when you made your transition into Sky TV?
Yeah, well, I finished the season in May at the FA Cup final, and I always wanted to move and make the next step. And at that point, Sky Sports News was the place to be, and was the home of football news, sports news, and I sent my CV into Sky Sports News, having been at Capital for, at that point, 8 years. And I remember I sent it after I think it was after the cup final, or just around the time of the cup final. And then I had 2 weeks holiday that I took. And then whilst I was on holiday, I got a response from Andy Cairns, who was his official role at that point. It changed later on, but he was the boss man, right? So he was the boss at Sky Sports News, and he was familiar with a lot of people that worked at Capital Gold Sport, because it had been a production line of people that had gone into the industry. I mentioned those guys earlier on: Dave Clark, Rob Watton, Julian Waters as well, who were all at Sky Sports News at that point. And he was a big fan of what was being done at Capital, because what we were was a team of reporters and journalists as well, that were very self-sufficient, very driven, and just on it, and passionate. And I think he liked that at that time, and he knew that if he took someone on from Sky Sports News, he took someone up from Capital Gold Sport, they were going to be able to hopefully hit the ground running. And they also knew the terrain in London as well, having covered so many of the games and so many of the teams in London. So he was very keen to take me on and give me an opportunity, which I'll be very grateful for. I am very grateful for. And yeah, I started there in August of 2013. And initially I was doing sort of all sorts. So, doing reports, standard sort of packages that you see. I think my first one that I did on air, I think it was like I voiced a piece about Steven Gerrard doing something. I can't quite remember what it was, but it was something. So that was like, I did it, went into the studio, went into the recording booth and everything, did it, and then, got home. I was like, oh, put it on. It's going to be on. So I was really excited to do that. And then gradually sort of was covering all sorts of different things at Sky Sports News for a couple of years. And then I moved into like a specialist role, which I was given covering England cricket. So I did that for 5 years. So I was following England's cricket team all around the world, which was amazing. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can dig into sort of various bits of it. But then after that, the next step was to then try and become a presenter. So, one thing that I don't know why I did, but I did. I always wanted to just try and sort of put my neck on the line a little bit and go, right, in radio, I want to try TV. I'd sampled it at university. I'd done some stuff in the studios there, and I'd sort of become au fait with it. But I wanted to push on into TV. And then I was willing to take the gamble doing cricket. It wasn't my specialist subject, but do I go take the cricket job? Yes, I'll do it. It's something different. And then off the back of that, I carried on doing it a little bit more, but I wanted to get into presenting then. And that was the next step. So yeah, I've always tried. And obviously that's something that I would always, implore people to do. Is try something new, and always take a little bit of a gamble, and maybe not a gamble, maybe that's the wrong word. Back yourself. That's the thing.
I'm a big believer in taking calculated risks and things that could potentially benefit you in the future. So yeah, I'd say that's great advice. Yeah, a gamble is sometimes one of the best things you can do. Kwaku, for example, is starting an internship tomorrow at TalkSport, which is a big gamble for him. But so yeah, he's I'm all for the gambling. Well,
looking for a sponsor there, Jay. Adam, in terms of your breakdown of it, it seems like at radio, at Capital, it was very much a DIY culture in terms of, it might be a symptom of the times in terms of you cutting tapes and stuff, but what was the difference between your time at Capital, which was radio, and then your time at Sky Sports, which obviously we see the glitz and the glam and the gloss of it. But how DIY was it? And what was the difference between the two cultures?
I think that in terms of the switch, you're right, from radio to TV, there is a lot more focus on your appearance and that side of things, and you're able to paint pictures with pictures rather than painting pictures with words on the radio. So I think that there was a step up in terms of the sort of the stature, obviously moving into Sky from Capital. Capital was very much a sort of a band of brothers, really, sort of working as a team, mucking in. They were, it was still high caliber at Capital at that time. This was around the time that sort of Radio 5 was only just starting, and Capital was one of the big hitters. But then obviously Sky is a step up, and in terms of the sort of the news gathering side of things, I don't think that there was a massive change, because when I started on Sky, you were very much going out on your own, you and a cameraman. It was very, very rare that you would go out with a producer and a cameraman, or, a team of production staff. And, I remember, and I look back now at the first tournament that I covered when I was doing cricket, which was the 2007 World Cup. And I was out there, just me and the cameraman. And then a big story broke, which was the Pakistan coach, Bob Woolmer, was found dead in his hotel room. And it was a huge story. And it was just a case of, right, you've got to go on air, you and your cameraman, find a way of doing it. So it was only the only very, very start of being able to get a signal, hook or by crook, that could broadcast from a laptop via a camera and get it beamed onto the television. That was like the first time we'd ever done it. And that became a big global story. So that was me broadcasting on not only Sky Sports News, but Sky News as well, and leading bulletins and things like that. So that was a time when it was still pretty much the same. It's just like you, camera person, and a camera, get the story on air. Very similar to being on radio, really. You're out there with a tape machine, you record an interview, and it goes out. And then it was only really later on in my time at Sky that it was always sort of a producer coming with you. And just my very nature was, no, it's all right. I can do it. I can get this. I can get that. We'll get an interview there. We'll bring it back. Or we can edit it on the laptop. Whatever you want. And you then have to sort of just let it go a little bit, and then also utilize the expertise of a producer who is there to produce, and that can be a really big thing. So I had to sort of transition from being micromanaging myself and just doing it myself to letting people do stuff in terms of production as well. So yeah, it's been, I look back at the actual times that I've been doing it, and the technological advances since I started. You'll speak to guys from the 70s and 80s or whatever, and it will be completely different again. But even from starting in 95 to 2020, what we were able to do then and now is totally different.
It sounds like you say, you have quite a lot, or you had quite a lot of autonomy when you first started at Sky, and that's autonomy. That's what I'm looking for. And it sounds like that's what you enjoy about the role. And I'm very surprised, and this is why it's great to have you on, how much autonomy you would have, because when we see Sky, we see the big production, we see it looks kind of big budget. So it's interesting to hear that you had quite a lot of control in terms of stuff you put out, and obviously the Bob Woolmer story that you covered. Was that written all by yourself? Was that written by yourself? Was it a case of you had full control of how the story went out? Was it you and your cameraman?
Well, yeah, that was, I remember the night before, it was March the 17th, so it was St. Patrick's Day, 2007, and the sort of the preamble to what happened was that Ireland had beaten Pakistan the night before, and it was a massive shock. So we followed, the story was obviously, Pakistan, they've lost. That's a big story. But because we were in the UK, and obviously also covering the Irish story, we followed Ireland. So we were in Kingston, and then we travelled across the mountains in Jamaica and over to the other side to the north, where Ireland were celebrating, and had an amazing party. And we went and got loads of great footage of them all dancing around and all that sort of stuff. And then the next morning, we did some interviews on this like little beautiful beach that they had. Most of them were still half cut because they'd been partying all night, no surprise. And then I got a phone call from someone from the ICC saying, do you know this has happened? And I called and I spoke to, I think I'd spoken to someone because I was calling about the next stages, and then this cropped up. And then I heard from another source that this had happened. And I had to break the news into, I remember speaking to David Gower as a live interview, just sort of explaining what had happened with Bob Woolmer. And then you have to completely switch and think, right, okay, hang on a minute. We have to continue covering the story. So I remember doing sort of phone interviews with Sky Sports News in the back of a car. I remember speaking to Jim White at one point, talking about the story when we were heading back down to Kingston. And then what we knew was at that point that the Pakistan team, they hadn't left. And they were still there because they had another game to play. So we wanted to try and get to their hotel. So we booked ourselves into that hotel, and we stayed. No, we booked a room in the hotel, but we didn't stay in the hotel. But we wanted to be able to broadcast from inside the hotel because we wanted to be there. And then it was just a matter of, it just spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. And then there was, questions as to the nature of how he had died and all this sort of stuff. It was a terrible, terrible story with someone's dad, someone's father, at the center of this story, husband as well. And you're having to sort of cover it. And I remember calling back to Sky Sports News and saying, look, are you going to bring in some, news specialist, big gun? And Andy, who was my boss, obviously I've spoken about earlier on, he was like, no, you're on it. You're doing it. Carry on. So that was I was empowered to go and do it and carry on with it, which I'll always be grateful for, because the amount of things that I learned just doing that one story, quite soon after I joined, 4 years in, was incredible. And then there was more crazy things happened with the cricket. Just very quickly, the next year we were in India when the terrorist attacks happened on the Taj Hotel in Mumbai, and we'd stayed in the hotel earlier on in the trip, and we were due to go back to that hotel, and we were actually with the England cricket team, who then knew that they had to get out of India as quickly as possible. So we were having to cover that on the hoof as well. And that was actually quite a scary time, because you think, right, it seemed from the attack in the Taj Hotel at that time that they were targeting Westerners, asking for passports and all that sort of stuff. It was a horrendous incident. But you had to cover the story, but then also think, right, we do need to leave as well. So, and I'd recently just got together with my now wife, and that was the first tour I went on when we were together, and this happened, and she was like, "What? You just stop doing it? What? This is terrible." So yeah, I think I did maybe 1.5 years more of that, and then I thought, right, okay, let's kick on and get into the sanctuary of the studio and stop traveling around the world a bit. So so it was a turbulent but very sort of educational period. I don't know I can't even remember what the original question was, but I'm now, all this stuff's coming back to me. I'm like, God, this is crazy.
No worries. That was fantastic insight. And like I said, that's the reason why I got you on, because we just see the final product. So to actually hear about what happens on the ground and the fact that it's just you and the cameraman is incredible insight. And yes, it's amazing the kind of work that you've previously done. Just before Jamie moves on to the next point, I just want to know, obviously you covered cricket quite extensively for Sky Sports. Were you into cricket before that? Or did you have to kind of learn on the fly?
Well, I'd done a lot of cricket coverage already at Sky. So we would always do sort of rolling edits, as they were called, when there was a test match on. So you'd be sat in an edit suite for 5 days, covering it. So I was on top of my cricket. I'd played cricket as a kid at school and stuff, and I played here and there. A couple of my mates, especially from down south in Sussex, they were into their cricket. So I played, and I played more as I covered it. So it wasn't like I'd never even heard of cricket, and I didn't know what end of the bat they held. I knew my cricket, but I hadn't been immersed in it, and I hadn't been covering it. So it was still a little bit of a departure. But I'll look back on those times in terms of the news, but also the characters as well that were involved at that time. And I compare it now, and it's not a criticism of the players now, because it's just the way that things evolve. But the characters that were around them when I was covering it, Kevin Peterson, Andrew Flintoff, Hoggard, Harmison, Michael Vaughan, Graham Swan, that team then, and then all the other stars around the other teams as well. Just even he was just starting, Chris Gale, and all the Australian team at that point. Ricky Ponting and Shane Warne, and like all these big guns. They were all still playing, and you're working with them and covering them, and then you're working with them even more when they come out of the game, and like working with Shane Warne covering the Ashes, and Nasser Hussain, and all these guys, like great guys and so good at their job, was brilliant. It was brilliant to work alongside all these people, and further my knowledge as well for the game. But it goes back to sort of putting your neck on the line and going, I'm not an expert, but okay, I'll go for it, and you sort of back your ability to maybe sort of get away with things at the end of the day.
Well, they're all larger than life characters, aren't they? They're, if you know cricket, all of those players. People still talk about Freddie Flintoff. People still talk about Kevin Peterson now. So yeah, they're larger than life characters, especially in cricket. I think what me and Kwaku are really interested in regards to Sky Sports is, both of us consume our news through Sky Sports still to this day. We'll still put Sky on. We'll still watch Sky, especially on transfer deadline day, and in the month that surrounds both the transfer deadlines. For someone like yourself that was so heavily involved in Sky, what is transfer deadline day, or the month of leading up to transfer deadline day, like for you? How often are you getting new stories? Do you constantly get rumours through, or do you get information from agents? What's the experience like for you?
It's I'll start at the end with transfer deadline day, because it sort of bleeds into everything else. But I think transfer deadline day at Sky Sports News was the day when it really came alive. It was all singing, all dancing. Everyone was, 100% on it. And, we had a great team of people out at grounds, training grounds. Yeah. And after a few things happened, they went inside the training grounds. Obviously, there was a few lady things that happened.
Tottenham training ground,
yeah, there was a few things that happened, and it was a real sort of event day to be part of, and really, really enjoyable. That if you were in the studio, you would have you'd have guests in, but you'd always have people to throw to and to sort of go, okay, right, we're going out to Arsenal now, or we're going to Liverpool or whatever. So you always knew that it was going to be a really dynamic, energetic day. And then latterly, I would be sort of specialising sometimes. I obviously, when Watford got into the Premier League, I was like, look, I know Watford. This is my team. So I'd be out at the training ground. And it's different being at the training ground rather than being in the studio, because when you're in the studio, you'd have a 2 or 3 hour slot, on air. Obviously, at the training ground, you're there from the crack of dawn right through until whenever the deadline is, be it 5 o'clock or 11 o'clock or whatever. And whatever happened, you were always happy to sort of go the distance. And you never really knew what was going to happen at the training ground, especially because, I don't know, it's just you've got to be into it. I know that some of my sort of colleagues at Sky during that period, some wouldn't like it and wouldn't be up for it, and would see it more of a chore to spend their full day at a training ground, especially if it's going to be quiet. But I don't know, I just really got into it. And you just sort of, maybe it goes back to my sort of Capital days of just going, yeah, come on, let's just, just get into it. It's fine. So, you'd sort of plan the day and, plan when you were going to maybe be able to go out to grab some food here or there, or sort of be, hunkering down in your car when it's pissing down with rain or whatever it was. And you're standing around freezing your nuts off, waiting to do a live. But then you're always keeping an eye on what's going on around you and who's that? Or can we catch
who's arriving?
Person or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And it's just really, it's a fun day. It's a fun day to be part of. But then, in the broader thing, and this still applies now, obviously, that the period of the transfer window, I look at it now in two different ways. From what we have to do in terms of the detail that we have to get on some of the transfers and some of the stuff that you never report because that it will be helpful down the line, or you will only report it when something actually happens. You'll hear that a player's been looked at, or you'll hear that an agent is talking here, or that they've got an interest in a certain position in the team. And you'll see a lot of rumours coming, to and fro, and you'll be able to stand some stuff up. You won't be able to stand other stuff up, but you sort of collate it all. And then when something happens, so for example, Watford have been after a striker for the whole of the transfer window. You've known that they've not been talking to this guy or that guy, but this one, maybe. It's always been a maybe, and there have been a few talks, and know that there's a little bit of interest. And then when the story comes to fruition right at the end, especially now sort of doing the stuff for the Athletic, you're able to tell the full story all the way through. And you have to deal with fact and fiction as well. You have to sort of, you have to do prospecting almost on a lot of information that you're getting, and then you'll get these few golden nuggets. Because there are a lot of agendas at play during a transfer window. You've got agents, you've got players, you've got clubs saying this, that, and whatever. They don't want a player to go, but maybe they do, because then that will bring in the money that they can get to bring in another player. So there is so much information during that window that just makes it like no other time. It completely changes your working outlook. And it's probably a time that, whilst you will hope to do sort of bigger, longer reads and stuff for the Athletic and in-depth coverage, which you can still do, it's a lot more sort of frenetic, and you're just trying to sort of be on top of stuff and just trying to keep tabs on so much information. So it's a fantastic time, and that applies whatever platform you're working on, be it Sky, be it Athletic or whatever. But by the end of it, everyone just goes, oh.
And breathe. Yeah.
And you just have a breathe. But also, and I said right at the beginning, I look at it at two levels. Now I've got an incredible amount of sympathy, especially after this last transfer window that we had, for the clubs and for the people working in the hierarchies at football clubs. Yes, they get a lot of criticism, but having to deal with these transfer windows it's such an intense period of time and so difficult. And especially if you're getting pecked by journalists for information at the same time and having to weigh up what you tell them and all this sort of stuff, it must be an absolute nightmare. When you've also then, at times, if there's an overlap of transfer window and games going on, having to still have a team out there playing and, fighting for points whilst you're doing all this negotiation in the background and expecting those players who might be leaving to still be performing at their top level and not worrying about getting injured and all this sort of stuff. So, I'm not big into it, but I can understand why playing Football Manager rather than actually being sort of in the game might actually be probably better for your health.
For sure. Me and Jamie are both big Football Manager fans, and it's probably easier in the game than it is in reality. And like you say, there's so many factors that these clubs have to deal with, and I'm not going to sit here and sympathise with these big clubs that are making so much money, but like you touched on, there's a lot that goes into it, especially when journalists are hounding you for reports because they've got a job to do as well. It seems like there's just so much that goes into not only deadline day, but the whole transfer window market. So have you got like a standout transfer throughout your time at Sky Sports, or any like crazy stories from deadline days that you can recall?
Well, I know that the one big one that happened on my watch, which we had to sort of cover and then break on deadline day. I can't remember exactly what year it was. You'll probably know, but I can't remember. But it was when Gareth Bale went to Real Madrid, and then that was finally confirmed, and we broke that. And I think at the time that was the record, the world record deal. So breaking that was pretty big. And then there was the crazy one where there was Kepa Arrizabalaga and then Neymar, both happened sort of within a couple of hours of each other. I think, or maybe I'm imagining that. I don't know. I can't remember if that's bang on. But obviously the Neymar deal happened as well. So you're sort of it's different, because when you're in the studio, you're quite removed from it. You're still reacting to stories, but you're not on the ground. You're not sort of right at the heart of it. And I think probably in my heart, I like being right in the heart of it. And I like being the one, down on the ground, sniffing around, trying to get to exactly what's been going on and breaking the story. Sometimes you are in a position, obviously, to break key stories when you're in the studio, because you're given information and you have to break it and you have to deal with it. And if it's a live moving situation, and there are, live pictures of an incident, or something bad's happened, or someone's died, or, there's a great transfer story, or whatever it is, just shows you the range of things that you have to deal with. You will have to obviously then kick on that story. But I think I just remember, like, in recent years, being out at training grounds on deadline day, just having to deal with, like, finding out about a transfer and then having to speak about someone as if you've known them all your life, and you are the go-to guy on this person. I remember finding out, I think it was 2017, maybe 2016, January, freezing cold, and it was an 11 o'clock deadline. Been there all day at Watford's training ground, and then I found out that they've signed this Venezuelan wonder kid called Adalberto Peñaranda, and I'm like, what? Who? Okay, fine. So you start sort of trying to find out who this dude is, and then you're reading about it, you're doing your research, you're able to say, right, they're going to sign this guy, blah, 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 blah. And then you realize that you've been stood there for so long that your face is frozen. And saying the words Adalberto Peñaranda when your lips don't quite work, it's quite a task to sort of pull it off. And because you have to say it so many times, you just think, oh, this is a nightmare. But it's just those little things that sometimes, I think it's important sometimes to show that you're human and not take yourself too seriously. There's going to be times, and I've had it on air, when I got completely knocked sideways by news. When Graham Taylor died, it just knocked me sideways completely. But on the whole, I think it's important that if you're not quite sure about something, or there's a funny element to a story, just show it and be human. And if something goes wrong in the studio, for example, I remember, like, there was this incident a couple of years ago, where this camera that I was working on, I was stood by the sky pad, as they called it, and this camera just started walking off, and it started hitting this other camera and stuff. And I know that, like, you could sort of be panicked and go, what's going on, or get worried and think, oh, hang on a minute, I need to stick to what I'm saying, and and try and carry on regardless. But sometimes in those live situations, it's far better to just actually go, right, okay, we've got a camera attacking another camera here, and they're doing this. It's like Robot Wars, and it was just sort of just make a bit of fun of it. Yeah. And when it's live, shit happens, and you just have to sort of roll with the punches sometimes. And so yeah, I think that's. I've gone off on another tangent, guys. I'm sorry, but it's. I think you just have to you have to be authoritative. That's one thing that's very, very important. But you also have to, I think it's important to show that you are a human being as well, in whatever form that takes, in whatever emotion. I think it's important. I think that's also, it helps with a connection with the audience as well, I think.
Nice. You briefly touched on, or not briefly, you've gone in depth about your time. No, but it's been an enjoyable listen. Me and Jamie have both been fascinated by like the stories you've provided to us. But in terms of the difference between what you did at Sky Sports or what you're doing at Sky Sports and now what you're doing at the Athletic, because you recently joined the team, and that's more print journalism. What's that like in terms of the Sky Sports more TV broadcaster side of things, and now the print journalist side of things at the Athletic, and like long reads and longer articles?
It's it goes back to what I've been saying before about taking on something that is going to challenge you, and it's definitely been a change, and there is still sort of quite a lot of broadcasting associated with the Athletic, and podcasts and live stuff that we've been doing, and awards, and there'll be more and more of that. So I've been able to keep the sort of the broadcasting side of my life ticking. But obviously, as you mentioned, the written journalism side of it is a challenge. It's something that I've not done a lot of. I had and I still have a publishing company. So we've written various books on various different football clubs, and I've written a couple of chapters on books on football clubs in the past. But I've never, on a regular basis, had to write, longer articles and more creative articles. So this has been quite an education for me. And at the beginning, it was very, very difficult. And I'm by no stretch of the imagination am I the finished article when it comes to writing articles. But you learn so much about different writing styles, and how to sort of balance your time as well, I think is really important. Even down to the rudiments of, doing interviews, transcribing them, the best way of doing that, then structuring your articles. So there's all that. That's all sort of nuts and bolts of print journalism, I guess. And then on top of that, you've got how you're able to maybe approach the investigative side of journalism differently to being in broadcast. So, if I'm working on radio, or if I'm working on TV, the majority of the time, obviously, if you ask someone for an interview, you want them to record it. You want them to put their voices down on record, basically. And then in print journalism, you're having so many conversations with people that are rarely, put down on paper. They are for guidance, to sort of help your knowledge of a subject, and to help to sort of nourish the quality of the article that you've got. And obviously you can sometimes quote them as sources and things like that, but there's the detail and the attention to detail, especially at the Athletic, is something that we pride ourselves on. And you mentioned doing longer reads and things like that. That's what we have the time to do, which hopefully for people that are part of the Athletic and stuff, it sets us aside. And that's at all being sort of demeaning to any other print journalist, because there are amazing print journalists that work for other organizations. But what a big part of the Athletic is being able to do dedicated coverage on a whole range of different teams. And due to the amount of people that we have working at the Athletic and dedicated on certain teams, we're able to spend that extra bit of time on subjects that, a journalist who's covering a whole load of different clubs just simply won't have the time to do. And we know our audience, we know the teams that our fans are into, we know what they want to hear about. And I think that's a really sort of unique part of the Athletic, that we are sort of, we're on it in terms of the detail that is special to the fans of those clubs. So it's been fascinating for me to change tack But it's gone back to my heart, really. I guess that I love finding out little bits of detail, and then I've been able to sort of write about Watford, but be able to contribute to other articles on broader subjects and things like that. So it's been really, really good. And also, aside from all of that, working at a company that has just started in the UK, obviously it's been going in the States for a while, and it's been set up really well. Being in a sort of a team from the start where everyone's sharing ideas and everyone's on the same page has been absolutely brilliant. So I'm really happy with it, but I know that I'm nowhere near, as I said before, complete in terms of my development as a print journalist. I have got a long way to go, and there are far more established journalists, print journalists working alongside me. So I'm learning from them as well, which is really good.
You're doing yourself a disservice there. I had to read through your João Pedro piece earlier today, and yeah, like you touched on, there's different angles you can approach journalism at, especially when you can write longer pieces and you've got the jurisdiction to write longer pieces. And that story about João Pedro and his dad going to prison is something that I wouldn't have known about as a fan of a team in the Premier League, as someone that doesn't know too much about Watford. So the Athletic providing a platform for people like yourselves to write and cover the teams that they actually know about and dedicate a lot of time to these stories and attack these stories from a different angles. Definitely something that I implore people to go and subscribe if you haven't, because there's so many different articles similar to the ones that you've written.
I'd like to jump on that as well, and I completely agree with Kwaku. I think the dedicated journalism that is that I like to think of the Athletic as a team of super journalists, or I feel like it's the best of the best writing about so many different clubs that you can sign up to the Athletic and read about various topics. It's such an insightful experience, especially for a general football fan, and for myself, I'm a West Ham fan. I'm still interested in all sorts of articles. I think, as you alluded to, you have done some dedicated journalism towards Watford. Obviously, Watford's very close to your heart. How often does bias or your fandom bleed into your writing when you're talking about Watford?
It's a really interesting question, and it's something that it's sort of leveled at me sometimes in terms of, oh yeah, but he's a supporter, he's going to say this, and on a lot of occasions you look at it and you go, right, okay, I can understand why you think that. But what you're forgetting is that I'm a journalist. That's my job. And I will cover a story, however painful it is for Watford, and I'll cover it in detail. And there will be things that, if you think about it, if you were to ask a fan to cover their club, and they were given an opportunity to potentially write something that is going to harm the football club or the image of the football club, or is going to be critical of a player or whatever, they would go, no, don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And that's where, I differ from a fan. So yes, I am a supporter of Watford, but my job is being a journalist and covering it, covering Watford as if they are any team. It's able to switch at times when, for example, the game against Liverpool, when Watford won 3-0, you're able to switch and capture the imagination of being a fan by being able to go, that was the greatest performance that Watford have ever had, arguably, and be able to go through, the various sort of options and is that right? Blah blah blah, posing the question. But then the proof of whether you are writing in a biased fashion is put to the test quite well by having covered Watford for the last year, because there has been so many stories, so many head coaches, and so many sort of troubling stories that if you were just simply there to protect the image of the football club, you wouldn't have gone anywhere near them. And I think that's basically the way that I can articulate it the best. That, you know, unfortunately, as a Watford fan, it's been a pretty rubbish 12 months. It's been pretty rubbish ever since I started covering the Athletic. But it's also been fascinating to find out from people, you know, from players, from you know, people that are part of the football club, you know, what's been going on, but then also from people that then leave the football club, and being able to sort of find out their views on things, including, you know, former managers, been able to do interviews with Quique Sanchez-Flores, Javi Gracia, Nigel Pearson as well, former players like Abdoulaye Doucouré recently I spoke to, and he was so open about it. But it's also what I always highlight, or I'm very, very conscious of, is that this is always often when it's when you're doing an individual interview, it is their take on things. So, you know, you can as a fan have like a massive, if you're trying to work out what went wrong with Watford, from, you know, being an FA Cup finalist and finishing 11th to being relegated 12 months later, you're not going to get a definitive answer. Oh, it was because, you know, everyone forgot their football boots or something. It was that. You piece together various bits so we can find out, right, well, Quique said this, Javi said that. We found out some information when Nigel Pearson got sacked, right, that. Abdoulaye Doucouré said this. Adrian Mariappa, who I spoke to this weekend, he said that. So it's all about just sort of trying to piece together things. But then at the same time, you know, I've sort of erred on the negative, because there's been a lot of sort of negative stories around Watford over the last 12 months. But now we're in a situation which I find equally as fascinating, that you've got a new head coach coming into a football club that is in a very difficult situation, had a really shortened transfer window, had a massive churn of players, some players that didn't want to be there, some have stayed, some have gone. You're in a different division, you're playing every 4 days. And there is almost this sort of, when you go through such a sort of a difficult period as a fan or as a journalist as well, that you're sort of programmed to be like, well, hang on a minute, they're going to, if things aren't going to plan for a couple of games, they're probably going to sack the head coach. But you then have to go, hang on a minute, we just need to be careful here, because things can take time. Like my answers often, things take time. But, you know, patience is really, really important. Some football clubs do it, but it's crept into so much of the English football, that short-termism. Yeah. Just being patient for a little bit, giving someone a little bit more time to prove it, not giving them a bit more rope. It's genuine time. Just time to feel secure, to grow into it, and to build those relationships with players and things like that. Because otherwise, we may as well just all pack up and go home. If no one's going to be given any time to actually prove that they can do something, it's impossible. It's like, you know, working, you know, when you go into talk sport, you're not going to kill it for the moment you get there. You need to build up a rapport with people. Jamie, I'm sure in your job, you build up relationships with people, and they take time. You can't just go, oh, right, he hasn't done it in 2 games, he's got to go. Come on, be realistic. We're all human beings. Let's just take a little bit of time, and hopefully that is now starting to come to fruition at Watford. And sometimes you need a really bad situation where maybe you've made mistakes to actually go, okay, hang on a minute, we've learnt from that. Let's now be a little bit better. But hopefully in 2 weeks' time, you know, if you're playing this interview and Vladimir Ivic has been sacked, and I'm like, I've not learned. But hopefully we're seeing the fruition of a little bit of learning that's going on over the last 12 months.
Well, it's been well, ever since I can remember. Watford's been a revolving door for managers and players alike. There's the link with Udinese. I feel like half the Watford squad went to Udinese over the summer window. But I think this is a really good time to actually talk about Watford this season. Like you're saying, with given a little bit of time, they're actually doing okay at the moment. What, third in the league, 1 loss in 10. Ismail. I think keeping Ismail Assar was a really good thing for you. Same with Troy Deeney. I think Troy Deeney is obviously there as that old head, that general in the dressing room. So, what are your thoughts on Watford this season? And do you think they can get back to the Premier League?
They've definitely got the squad to do it, and they've got the players with experience and that are young and exciting to get that right mix together. I think that they've got the right head coach to do it, to have come in and changed things, not just sort of naturally just change the way of coaching them or things like that, but being prepared to set them out in a different formation and stick with it and say, look, this is what I want to do, and taking them through that path. Yes, he's now started to change it a little bit, going from a back 3 to a back 4, which is seemingly working a little bit better. But someone who is sort of confident, who has, they're a disciplinarian, but they've also got the ability to not be totally stubborn. I think that he's also learning on the job a little bit himself in a new environment. So I think overall, all the ingredients are there for Watford to do well this season. But it's such a different season. More midweek games, playing every 4 days. It's so hectic, and then you throw in the COVID element where you may have, through no fault of anyone's, you might be missing 3 players, pulled out of your squad at the last minute because you've done a round of testing, then having to change things around. Obviously, the no fans element, and that's another big thing as well. That you've got a head coach coming in, or you've got players coming into a new environment, and you're sort of dropping them in, and you don't get that taste of where you are. You don't get the feedback from the crowd, obviously, but also you don't get that warm support. You don't get the smiles or the pats on the back or the "come on, mate, it's all right," to a head coach or whatever that you might get if you had the fans there. So hopefully now, when the fans are coming back, that there will be able to be a little bit more warmth. But also, if the performances or there are moments in the game where a player just needs a little bit of a kick up the arse, they'll get that. And that extra sort of, I don't know how many percentage points it's worth, but just that extra little bit that will add the adrenaline to the players' performances, I think is going to change. Is going to change things, and I think it will change in terms of Watford's point of view. I think it will make them even better, because they're already doing well and they haven't even been performing hugely well. They had a great win against Preston, and it was the first time it really, really clicked in the final third. But they're sort of bubbling at the moment. But they can really, I think they can really go. They can keep on getting better and better and better. So I think they're in a good place, and they're getting senior players back, and they've still got other important players to come back into the squad as well. So yeah, I'm feeling positive about their chances this season, but it's a hectic league. So I don't know. It's going to be tough.
For you to be bubbling and sitting third in the table is not bad going, especially in Championship, which everybody knows is one of the most difficult leagues in the world. So it seems like it's good going at Watford. I would love to hear what's Vicarage Road like with no fans in there. Obviously, we don't know as general fans. What's the atmosphere like in the stadium with no fans there?
Well, I think probably one of the advantages of being a smaller stadium, so it's only like 20 odd thousand capacity. I mean, it's still a lot bigger than League One, League Two stadiums, but one of the advantages is that you do still get a little bit more of an atmosphere with no fans in there, simply by the the support staff and the subs and all that sort of stuff. When they're sort of shrieking and hollering and all that sort of stuff, then it can actually add a little bit of atmosphere. But on the whole, the experience of being in a football stadium without any fans is soul destroying, really. And it was interesting because Troy Deeney, there was a post that Watford put on Instagram a couple of days ago, and I'll tell you what he said first, and then I'll tell you what I thought about it. He basically said, look, I've done all this when I was 18, 19 years old, playing in empty stadiums when I was playing reserve team football. Effectively, he said it was boring. And I can understand that. I can understand it. But, and then go back to the sort of the jigsaw that I was talking about, piecing things together. When someone says that and they are the leader of your football team, and you think, right, so did that sort of added to your, or that contributed to a sort of a lack of motivation during a really key period of the season after Project Restart. You think, if that was in your mind at the time, that's probably one of the contributory factors. And then Adrian Mariappa has said a similar thing. When I interviewed him, he said, I think we really suffered not having the fans there. One, because there'll be some players, maybe like Troy, that really feed off the crowd, you know, good or bad. He's motivated by being booed, but he also gets great support from Watford fans. So that was an interesting side of the Project Restart that I think had a big hit on Watford. But then on the whole, I think it's something that is really sad that fans have not been there. But hopefully, even just like small incremental amounts of, 2,000, 4,000, whatever it's going to be, and whatever the size of the stadium and whatever tier you're in as well, I think it will start to bring the feel of real football back again. And that will make a really big difference. But I would also say, and I did a podcast with the Watford guys recently, and I did also say, as almost like a word of warning, that you are coming back, and it's great. And I love the fact that fans are going to be able to come back. And I'm very lucky and privileged to have been in stadiums, just watching football week in, week out when fans haven't been allowed in. But it's not the same. It's not the same as being in a full stadium. And there will be a mix of emotions, I think, for a lot of people, just thinking, wow, this is actually quite bleak, even though you've got 2,000 people in the stadium. And it's just going to take time, like with anything, with the virus, with the vaccine, all this is sort of just building up and up and up. It's going to take time, but at least we've now got something to look forward to in terms of getting fans back.
Most definitely. It's like you say, it's football without the fans is nothing, or not nothing. We still enjoy the game on the pitch, but without fans, like I say, it's very, very bleak and very, very sad. And I'm interested to see what it will be like with 2,000 fans, especially say in Anfield, where they've got a 50, 60,000 seater capacity. 2,000 fans in the stadium like that, I'm interested to see how that would look and sound, and how it would feel for the fans in the stadium as well. Very interesting. Obviously, we'll be remiss to ask you, whilst we've got you on, I know your concentrations are very much on the Championship as you cover Watford for The Athletic. But what's your thoughts on the Premier League at the moment? We had a couple of decent games yesterday. I suppose the Chelsea Spurs game didn't live up to the billing. But what's your thoughts on the Premier League as a whole this season?
I think it's sort of, following on from the stuff about the fans. I think it's shown that, some teams have been able to build a team spirit despite not having fans in the stadiums, and clubs have been affected in various different ways during this period of time. And that comes down to, an individual player being off because, they're not feeling quite at it, or they've got an injury, or they've been affected in some way. So I think that there's so many different elements at the moment that are making the Premier League a more volatile league to sort of cover. Obviously, we've seen with Liverpool, they've had their significant injuries, which has sort of knocked them sideways a little bit. And Manchester City as well, they haven't been quite at it. Yes, they won against Burnley and it was very convincing, but I think, I'm not exactly sure, but I think they always win 5-0 against Burnley at home. I think that's just sort of like a standard thing that's agreed at the beginning of the season. They're obviously going to come back to it, but I think it's been really good to see. I know, Quaker, you're obviously a Chelsea fan, but seeing Tottenham at the top of the Premier League for a bit has been great. Seeing Everton up there and in the mix, Southampton, Leicester as well. It just shows that it's just sort of been a bit more of a sort of an equalisation across the teams a little bit this season. That I don't know. Maybe it's coming down. It's coming down to that sort of that team spirit. Different things within the squads that are maybe just giving some teams that extra little lift. I don't know whether it's, look, it may well be that by the time we get to January and we head in towards, you know, the title race and stuff, it will start to have more of a usual look to it. But I think there's every chance that you could have, you know, one of those teams that I've mentioned, or, you know, a Wolves, for example, having a better season and an opportunity to break into, you know, maybe not into the top four, but getting a European place as they have done in previous years.
Yeah.
And I quite like the fact that when you look at the Premier League table and you see Arsenal in 13th, I think they are in now. Yeah. I quite like that, because it's not anti-Arsenal. It's just fine. You're not guaranteed success. Mm-hmm. You're not guaranteed your position. The big six, yes, they'll probably finish, and Arsenal are one of those, so they've got a long way to go. But you know, maybe 5 of the big 6 will probably be up there, and they'll be okay. But you'll get your random results, and I think it's been quite good, that sort of narrative of, it's almost like Lewis Hamilton, for example, getting like a 10-second penalty or something and being held back on the grid, and then having to sort of chase his way up through the other drivers to get to first place. That's the sort of the situation that Arsenal are in now. I felt a bit sort of surprised that at the bottom of the table, Sheffield United are quite as well, not. I don't know.
I would say they're a victim of the. I would say when you look at the Premier League, the absence of fans. I would say that, you know, Bramall Lane, they're really seeing the difference there. I think they played that specific way last year that was new to the Premier League, but they also were buoyed by their fans. You know, they were the constant underdog. So couple the fact that people are adjusting how they play against them and the lack of fans, you can just see that's really affecting Sheffield, you know, at the moment. So, you know, when fans do come back in stadiums, I would be interested to see the transformative, you know, effects on Sheffield. And like you say, I'm a West Ham fan. You know, some teams have built a spirit. I think West Ham have really built a spirit, and have, maybe you could argue, because of the new stadium, you know, you could say that West Ham have never really looked comfortable in that new stadium, and there's the current dynamic between the fans and the board and so on. I think West Ham could have potentially benefited from having a lack of fans there, because they look so comfortable in that new defensive system under David Moyes. So this season is a season of, I think it's the most wide open Premier League we're going to see for a long while. And when you compound it with the fact that you've got, you know, the big teams like Liverpool, obviously Klopp's alluded to it on the weekend, but the amount of games they're having to churn out. You look at the amount of games Tottenham are having to churn out. I think Harry Kane has played 24 games in 70 odd days. It's more than half a season. So I think it's the most wide open Premier League for a team like Leicester or Everton, you know, people that aren't in Europe. I think this is their best opportunity they're going to have for a very long while, just to, you know, put a real challenge for the title. But yeah, it's wide open.
But going back to what you were saying about, you know, West Ham, I mean, David Moyes, he wasn't guaranteed that he was going to stay after last season, but they've seen something. And even though the win against Watford was probably the key one to actually keep you in the Premier League, the performances prior to that were actually encouraging. So things were going better. So it's like, okay, hang on a minute, we might be onto this. We might be onto something. So sort of retaining someone, just having a bit of patience, having a bit of time. And I know sort of David Moyes hasn't had it all his own way in, you know, ever since he left Everton, but sometimes it just takes time for someone just to bed in, and they might not be that fashionable, but they can still get results. And I think, you know, to his credit, he's actually doing pretty well at West Ham. But then I don't know, with West Ham, they're always sort of a couple of results away from sort of imploding. So I don't know. But fingers crossed for you, for the fans. You know, it's actually turned turned a corner and you could be more of a consistent, solid Premier League team.
For sure. And going back to the Athletic podcast, I think it was summarised perfectly in there. I think for the last 10 years or so, I think West Ham have been victim of very poor recruitment and often trying to get the best person for a role for the least amount of money. I think that's always been a problem for West Ham, especially since me being a fan. And I think David Moyes seems to have more authority in his signings. I think bringing in Souček and obviously bringing in Kafau, two very hard-working David Moyes signings that are just bedding in, getting their job done and going about their job quietly. And like you say, giving them time to bed in. So yeah, it's a positive time to be a West Ham fan. How long that time will last for, who knows? I can just enjoy it while it lasts. I'm hoping it lasts up until we play Chelsea, and I've got that bragging rights over Quakey, but who knows?
Adam, we've taken up a lot of your time on a Monday morning. We greatly appreciate you coming on. It's been amazing to hear your insight on not only Watford, but your time at Sky, your time at Capital, and just your life as a football journalist, broadcaster, presenter. So thank you very much for your time, man. We'll put your socials in the link below or in the description below. And yeah, I'm sure we'll catch up soon in the future.
No problem, guys. Good luck with everything. Thank you.
Cheers, man. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Well, there we go, Quakes. Episode 12 in the books. Again, I say this every week, and I know I sound ridiculous, but that's probably my most favourite episode. Some of the stories that he had, some of the insight that he's just given us, incredible insight, and what a life he's led in terms of sports journalism and sports in general. Buzzing with that one.
Yeah, man, it was a sick episode. He gave us incredible insight into his life as a sports journalist and just his path into it as well. So where he was covering cricket and then moving on to football and now covering the team that he loves in Watford for the Athletics. So yeah, man, it was a sick episode, and really appreciate the time that Adam gave to us. It was sick.
Yeah, he's a top man, and like he said, I really appreciate his time. But I suppose that's enough from us for this week. People have heard more than enough of our voices.
Yeah.
Where can they find us, Quakes?
So on Twitter, it's WTF Podcast 90. We've been more active, people. We've been more active. We're doing a few live tweets during the games on Sunday. On Instagram, it's at We Talk Football Podcast. On Facebook, it's We Talk Football Podcast. You know where to find us: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah, cheers, guys.